Say hello to my little friends. Oh, this one's not assembly. Today we're going to be talking about the Zinc. This is an amazing design by 118 Design. Key's been working on this project for a while. This is the Zinc 2.0. So from the version 1, which he got a lot of feedback on and a lot of people liked, there's a lot of YouTube videos out there on reviews, he made the 2.0, which is even better, performs even better, prints better, assembles with less hardware. He really did a great job on it. When I went and made the first Zinc, there were a handful of things I still had to do. Like you may have heard about the 1.0, there's some filing and sanding and some tolerances that aren't quite right. And so I just ran into those same issues on the 1.0 that I did. Looking at the hardware and how he designed it to go together, I made a couple of tweaks to make it so that the assembly was easier and the prints were a little bit more reliable. Not a big deal unless you're making 100 Zincs, then that little bit of time saving adds up. So with a couple of tweaks and changes I did here and there, I was able to go from a 2-hour build for the first one to about a 10 to 15 minute build for the second one. So without further ado, we'll go into the changes that we did. I have here a set of original prints from the original files that I downloaded and printed on my producers, and these are the files I modified so you know exactly what's changed if you're curious. The biggest change that I made for quality of life is the sanding on the slide. Like the Pigeon and other designs that have a moving slide, it can be a bit stiff. Now this one is pretty dang smooth. So that's good. When you put the plunger tube in, slide that in there, it actually flares out the slide and makes it even more stiff. So yeah, that's not gonna function. So I went in and I just made some tolerance changes to the slide to make it slide. These are straight off the printer with a little bit of just taking off the brims. And this one pretty much just drops free. If I put a plunger tube in this one, it's looser. Now this is an older slide. Mixing the old parts with new parts, but the slide with its changes prints out, and then with the plunger tube and everything in it, you have a nice smooth fit. So no filing, and this one is still a bit stiff. I can't see that, but you can feel it kind of lock up a little bit. And this one is smooth all the way. You can actually hear it too. People like that sound. So there's the slide. Some other changes that we did here is we made the hardware cross-compatible with some of the hardware from the Spring Thunder, Talon Claw, and Caliburn. So all the original pins were your standard dowel pins for the sear, for the trigger guard, and then for the mag eject spring. But we switched those out for Caliburn pins, which are just a little bit smaller, but that way you can have cross-compatibility with your hardware. And if you also notice, we did the same thing with the screws. His original 440s were socket heads, which some people like socket heads because you can use them with an Allen wrench and they strip less often. There's not actually a lot of force on any of these screws. There's force on this screw, but it's pulling backwards. And then the force on this, we only have force on it is if you get a dart jammed in there. So with that in mind, I realized that it was probably worth it to use a screw that doesn't use an Allen key so you can have quicker disassembly and spring swap. So just went in, removed those spots, resized the holes, and then you can use your Caliburn for 440 flatheads on the front and back. I also did the same thing with the muzzle in the front. The original muzzle, again, just use a pin. I found that a screw works just fine as a pivot, and I resized both the sear and the front so that you can use a 440 screw so it's nice and flush and flat. Some other things that I had to do on the original model was all the tolerances for the smooth rod came out too tight. So on the original front, yeah, it's too tight to fit into the hole there. It's too tight to fit on the plunger, and it's too tight to fit in the slide. With doing the design changes, now it fits. Another big one was the trigger. The trigger on the 1.0 Zinc was really stiff, and so this one came out not too bad, but on this dark gray one there was a lot of friction between the sides of the trigger and the frame, and so make the trigger a little skinnier. Another big issue was the barrel was really tight on the trigger and even more tight in the frame. So again, I just went through and made the holes bigger so the trigger, just sliding it together, no sanding, no filing or lube, slides nice and smooth. And that was a huge quality of life thing. When the first one I built, Took a lot of elbow grease to get it together, but this one now fits just fine. Other changes are 440 on the top instead of, again, a socket head, 440 flat head. If you have elephant's foot at all on the mag, I know a lot of people complained about that on the Zinc 1.0, about having to post-process the followers, not getting the mags to feed. So far, I've built 7 or 8 of these mags and they all fit just fine with no post-processing. So I just modified the bottom side, reduced the elephant's foot, changed the size a little bit, and I added a brim to the mag so it would stop falling over on the print beds, and they work just fine now. The other change I did on the front was getting this thumb nut into the front. I found that the original one was such a tight fit that it really wouldn't go in hardly at all. So again, I just went through, resized it a little bit. So now we have a press here, so we can use an arbor press and press it in instead of having to heat insert it. And it seems to work just fine. And that way you could just put it in with a mallet or a hammer instead of needing a soldering iron to build a springer. He had a threaded plunger core on the plunger, and to screw that in, I had to use 2 pairs of pliers and really crank on it. And I can only get in that much by hand. Using 2 pairs of pliers, I kind of destroyed my plunger core here. So I went in and made the threads a little looser, like a lot of the fits that I did that on. So that way you could screw in the plunger core to the plunger just with a nice hand tight, maybe use a pair of pliers to get it cinched down. And that makes the assembly pretty toolless. So my original one, with how tight this smooth rod was with all the other parts, in order to get it together, I had to use a socket to screw in the hex nut. But now you can assemble the whole thing with just maybe a pair of needle nose pliers, and that's it. Another thing that I'm changing is the mag release. That can be something that requires a lot of filing to get right in order to get to slide smooth and release your mag when you want to. I just went in and I changed the shape of both pieces to fit with more tolerance. And also for print quality, you can see that there's quite a lot of overhang in there. So I went in and I made a little bit more of a dome shape on the inside so it would print without supports a little bit better. Again, you could change your print settings as well, but getting, say you have a lot of printers and you got to make a lot of Zincs, then you're going to have to do a lot of dialing in. You can see the frame also had those spots for hex nuts that I just removed on the frame. So now the screws just drive straight into the holes. And that seems to work just fine. And that means you don't have to try to cram in nuts in there, less hardware, less cost for you guys, and less work here in the shop trying to shove those little nuts into those holes. And like a lot of tolerances are really tight. And when you're assembling 100 of these, that's gonna make a big difference. Hopefully that has some quality of life improvements for you as well. He did just release the frame and the slide step files on GitHub as well that you can then modify to get the right fits. But as far as I'm aware, the rest of the files are pretty proprietary, open source, but just STLs to modify. Hopefully this will make your build easier if you get a DIY kit or a hardware kit from him and you want to print your own prints. It's a really great blaster. He has done amazing work on this design. I'm really impressed by how little hardware it uses and how easy the prints were. I don't think I had any print failures or anything that really was extremely difficult. So that was the changes we did on the Zinc 2.0. We did these changes in hopes to make the build easier, not only for ourselves, but also for you. If you bought a DIY kit from us, or you're buying hardware from 118 Design and gonna print your own, or you get prints from us, hopefully these changes will also increase the quality of life in your build as well. Our goal is to make these designs as easy and hassle-free as possible for the community, to try to get more of the designs into the hands of front-end users or frontline users. That was pretty good. So there it is, guys. Keep nerfing, and if you have any comments or suggestions or requests on the Zinc or any other designs, please feel free to reach out and we'll work together to continue to make more and more designs accessible for everyone in the hobby. So keep nerfing.